Hey guys, Michael Hyatt here. We're simulcasting on Periscope, YouTube, and two different Facebook pages. Thom Rainer's, which I'll introduce him in a moment, and then on mine. So I'm not sure it's working on every platform. This is the first time I've used Restream, but hopefully it's working okay. Yeah, it may say test on some of these platforms, but I think I just fixed it. It's actually not a test, but I'm going to bring in some of your comments as we have time and as we get through this. But hey, we're here to talk about a new resource that we have available for you guys. I'm going to tell you about it a little bit. It's called the Vision-Driven Church Leader. It's absolutely free. I'm going to explain how to get it just in a little bit after I give you some preliminary information. In case you don't know me, my name is Michael Hyatt. I'm the founder and CEO of Michael Hyatt and Company. I'm a New York Times bestselling author, and our company basically does business coaching. You know, we also have the Full Focus Planner. We have a variety of resources, but we have about 450 clients that are in our business coaching program. But I just published a new book, which hit the Wall Street Journal list 2 weeks ago, called The Vision-Driven Leader. And it's all about how to create vision, which in my humble opinion is more important now than ever, especially in the middle of this crisis. So the couple things I want to do, first of all, if you haven't seen the book or bought it, there it is. I would encourage you to pick up a copy. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever better books are sold, as they say. So at any rate, I'd love to have you pick up a copy if that makes sense for you. But also, I want to give you a definition of what I mean by vision so that we're all on the same page. Now, let me just say, first of all, if you're a church leader, if you're a pastor, if you're an elder, if you're a deacon, if you're on church staff, this podcast is going to be awesome and relevant, or I said podcast. I meant live streaming. This is going to be awesome and relevant for you guys. And I can't wait to introduce Thom, which I'm going to do in just a moment. But let me give you my definition of a vision. So here's what it is. A vision script is what I'm talking about. And that's what the book outlines. It's a written document, 3 to 5 pages in length. So this isn't, a vision statement. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. Something that's clever, brief, short, something you could put almost like a slogan on a coffee mug or a t-shirt. No, sir. We're talking about a vision script, a more robust document than that. It outlines a clear, inspiring, practical, and attractive vision of your organization's future, and it describes reality as you see it 3 to 5 years from now. It's written in the present tense as though it has already happened. Now, here's the interesting thing. When the book came out, I almost immediately started hearing from pastors. I have a lot of them in my coaching program, but they wanted to know, how does this apply to church life? So I was doing an interview with my good friend Thom Rainer, and we were talking about, and he helps pastors, helps churches. He's got a ministry called Church Answers, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute. But we started talking about creating a guide for church leaders, and this is it. This is what it looks like. Again, I'm going to tell you how to get a copy of it free. Thom's son, Art, wrote it and killed it. Totally nailed it. Okay, so here's the thing I want to do before I go any further. And I got to get back to my right screen here. This is live and this is real and this is how we roll. Okay, so I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Thom. Let me just make sure that I got him on camera because I want you to see his smiling face as I introduce him. Thom serves as the president and the CEO of Church Answers and the executive director of Revitalize Network. He's a graduate of the University of Alabama, where he received his degree in business administration. He received both the Master of Divinity and a PhD degree from Southern Seminary. He served as pastor of 4 churches. He's the former president of Rainer Group Consulting. He served for 12 years as the dean of Southern Seminary and for 13 years as the president and CEO of Lifeway Christian Resources, which is where we met when I was the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers. But Thom has authored or co-authored, get this guys, 26 books. Thom, you're amazing. And among his greatest joys are his family, his wife, Nellie Jo, 3 sons, and 11 grandchildren, if you can believe it. So please join me. Whoops, I went too far ahead there. Please join me in welcoming Thom to this broadcast. Hey, Thom, great to see you.
Michael, I love that introduction, especially the 11 grandkids. You really went from the base to the ultimate. So you start talking about those. And I know you got a few yourself, so you can understand how I would like to prolong that part of the introduction, but I won't.
I do, but I just was thinking between your 3 sons and 11 grandchildren, my 5 daughters and 9 grandchildren, I think we have the same amount of progeny. Is that the right word?
I think so. I think so. That means big Christmases.
That's exactly what it means. Okay, so we got a few questions here, and I'm just going to take these as we are going along here. So here's a question. Jennifer, not a question. She said, I love listening to the audiobook and will be going through the physical book. Awesome. Tom, can you see those questions when I throw them up?
I do.
As well?
I do.
Okay.
And by the way, this technology is great. I think every time I'm with you, I learn something new, whether it's technology, coaching, or something. I got to stay away from you because my head gets too full. I'm just watching what you're doing right now.
Well, we'd be happy to share this technology with you. And I think Marissa's going to post in the comments section, at least on Facebook. And again, we're broadcasting to Periscope, to YouTube, and to Facebook. But she's going to post into Facebook where she's monitoring kind of my live streaming setup because we get asked that question every single time. Okay, I got to ask you some questions because you're the expert and you've really taken this vision thing and owned it. And I love that. And I've always thought of you as a visionary leader. So first of all, tell us just a little bit about Church Answers and what you do there with that business/ministry.
Church Answers is a very, very basic organization with a very basic purpose. We seek to help churches get healthier and church leaders to get healthier. So we have a lot of different resources and a lot of different directions where that goes, but that's the core. We absolutely love the local congregation. We absolutely love pastors and other church leaders. And I don't know if I'm their biggest cheerleader, but I got to say this. I'm one of their biggest cheerleaders. I've served as a pastor in 4 churches way back when, but I still know the pains, the hopes, the dreams, and the visions that pastors have. And with my team at Church Answers, we're just seeking to resource them and walk alongside them. So we're there to help churches and church leaders get healthier.
Fantastic. So where can people find out more about Church Answers?
Well, churchanswers.com is the current site, but I got to have a little caveat there. ThomRainer.com is where all of our resources are. We are merging those 2 sites. They won't be merged today, obviously, but by the middle of May or early June, it will just be churchanswers.com. It's going to be an incredible site for content and other information on practical church ministry.
Well, you've done a phenomenal job building your platform and helping pastors and churches. So.
All right, Michael, you got to let me stop right here now. Yeah. How did I get started? I had a meeting with Michael Hyatt and Megan, and I said, okay, I'm thinking about retiring from Lifeway. Help me get started doing this. So I got to give a lot of credit to the 2 of you and the way that you pushed us and encouraged us in this direction.
Well, thank you. I have to say you're one of the best clients we've ever had because you took the ball and ran with it. I mean, from that brief meeting, I mean, we didn't say that much, but you got inspired, you figured it out, and you flat built an enormous platform. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
By the way, guys, if you have a question, let me encourage you to put a Q before your comment so that I can tell that it's a question. So put a Q before the question. Clay, I see your question. So, yeah, I'm gonna actually jump right into a question here and let you answer this one. This one's from Clay. He says, how do you push forward even though you feel like you're dragging others with you? Does that ever happen in the church?
Clay sounds like a pastor. I don't know if he is a pastor or not, but he sounds like a pastor. Some of the principles of change are present, whether you're in a church or whether you're in a secular organization. We know that things are different within the local church, and we know that we are seeking God's strength and His help as we move forward. But Clay, for you, you basically go to the speed that they will follow you, and sometimes you have to eat an elephant, which means one bite at a time, and so there's incremental change. And one of the things I say to pastors, and it would apply beyond churches, get out in front of your congregation so that they can see that you are leading, but not so far out in front where they think you're the enemy and they shoot you in the rear. So you just, in a church, it's an all volunteer organization. It's not like you have command and control. So you really have to make certain they're coming along with you. There's a lot I could unpack on that, but maybe that little cliche slogan will help a bit.
No, that helps. Okay, another question I have is, what kind of challenges are churches facing in the current climate?
The initial challenges were pervasively about stewardship, about giving. The immediate thought was, okay, we're not having in-person services, so Are we going to even be able to keep the doors open? Will people continue to give? As a matter of fact, we did a survey of churches right at the point that churches were not allowed to have in-person services, and 15% of the respondents thought their churches would close. That's huge. I mean, that would
Wow.
be like 85,000 churches closing. It would just be monumental. But 3 weeks later, that number had dropped from 15% to 3%, which is good.
Hmm.
Well, only 3% of the churches thought they were going to close. So the stewardship or the financial giving issue has gone away. The big question right now, and this is almost a perfect segue. I didn't plan it this way, but this is almost a perfect segue. How can I see where I'm going? Uh,
Yeah.
this is where I am right now. This is the present reality. I'm kind of adjusting to this digital world and streaming services, but what's on the other side? How do I see that? And how do I get there? So it comes back to that vision thing. Vision is vision, and it's needed whether you are in a pandemic or looking beyond the pandemic. So that in essence, and Michael, we've been breaking that down in webinars and other times to try to find out what they need to know, and we're getting more specific with that. But it's the vision thing. That's the big question that they're asking.
That's so great. Well, in your introduction to the Vision Driven Church Leader, which I have to mention again, your son wrote and killed it. But you wrote the introduction. You were kind enough to do that. But you mentioned a pastor that you're coaching who has trouble getting his mind around the vision thing. Is this common among pastors that you've worked with?
It's not only common, it is almost ubiquitous. I mean, there are very few pastors with whom I speak that will say, I understand vision fully. I grasp what I'm supposed to do. And by the way, Michael, there would be a significant minority that won't even like the word. They will think that it's a secular word, that it does not have a biblical basis to it. I come back with, of course, a bit of a disagreement on that. But many of them will say, tell me what this vision thing is and help me to understand more fully how I can develop a vision for my church. And by the way, when the Vision Driven Leader came out to begin, you sent me a draft copy from the publisher did, and I devoured it. I just absolutely devoured it. And I don't know if this came to my top of my mind, so I don't want to play to it too much. But the moment you contacted me and said, help us to apply this to the local church, I mean, it was a resounding clarion call to do so, because I said, yeah, if church leaders can get a hold of this, then they will get it. Because most church leaders believe, Michael, that vision is a slogan, or it's just
Yep.
a few cliche words. Very few of them are thinking about things that are similar to vision script. And that's why when Thom Rainer, my son, my middle son, and one of the things I said is the grandchildren give me great joy. With 3 sons, give me great joy as well. And when Art agreed to be the translator for this, and I'm putting in the introduction, one of the things I wanted to do right away was get this in the hands of church leaders, pastors, and other church leaders as well. So I got excited just to think about the concept.
Well, I got initially excited about it when I started to hear from pastors, and I thought, oh my gosh, because I have such a heart for pastors and for churches. And I think that vision so impedes organizations, the church organizations. Like, one of the places where I feel it shows up is when the pastor or the church leadership or the board or whatever the governing body is, when they immediately jump to resources. Like, somebody suggests, hey, we need to build a bigger building. And they immediately say, well, we don't have the funds for that. And one of the things I've always said is that resources follow vision. Money follows vision. So they're getting it backwards. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree with that. I mean, people, you go back multiple generations, Michael, and you go back to the builder generation, those born before 1946. That group may have given to the institution. But that was the last group. When the boomers came along, those born between 46 and 64, and then Gen X, then millennials, and now Gen Z. When those generations came along, they said, we will gladly be generous to the organization of which we're part, particularly churches, but tell us where we're going. Let us know how we can get there. Tell us what you see for the future. And you mentioned that, maybe some pastors didn't know how to get there. A lot of pastors really have no concept, and this is not a derogatory comment because I love them, but they have no concept how to build a plan to lead a congregation from here to there. That's why this book and then Art's interpretation of it for pastors or translation of it for pastors and other church leaders is such a huge, huge help for churches and church leaders.
That's good. Good. Okay, I'm going to grab a couple more questions here because they're coming in hot and heavy here. So Ken asked this question: how do we write a vision script in light of God's providence? Doesn't the church simply have the Great Commission as its vision script? And one of the things I want to say, and I'm going to let you answer this, the bulk of this, Thom, but I think I would say that the Great Commission is a mission statement.
It is.
And there's a big difference between a mission statement and a vision statement. A vision statement answers the question, where are we going? And the mission statement is really about the why, or the purpose for why we're here. So what about writing a vision script in light of God's providence? Because I know some people think, I have to be prompted by the Holy Spirit. I just can't, make this stuff up. So how do you balance those two things?
Well, think of any pastor in any situation. Let's just go to preaching. We could say, I am not going to prepare a sermon. And there may be even a minority who don't prepare the sermon.
I know some of those people.
I'm going to let the Spirit lead. But you prepare a sermon because you want to say something specifically to the congregation in light of what the Scripture says. And so you get down to specificity and you direct that sermon. That does not diminish the theology of the sovereignty of God one bit. God has given us free will to work within his sovereignty. He's got his plan, but we are doing so. You are exactly right. The Great Commission and the Great Commandment, for that point, are both mission statements. It is what every Christian and every church should be doing. But every church and every Christian, they're different. That's why we have spiritual gifts. That's why we have different congregations. We have different mixes. And the question is, what do you want me to do as a leader at this time to lead my church forward in this specific context at this specific time? And it is different for every church. The church is following a vision script more than they're following just a mission statement when they begin to ask those questions and answer them.
That is so good. And I loved it in Art's guide to this, where he talked about the difference that churches have in vision script. I mean, some churches are planted in an urban setting, and they have a special, calling to minister to the poor, to the disenfranchised, to others. Other people are in suburbs. We've got churches in downtown Franklin, but the vision's going to look different in those different contexts.
It'll always look different according to geographical context, ethnic mix of the church, age of the church. A church plant is going to have a different vision statement, all things being equal, than a church that's been around 100 plus years. There's so many variables in there. If we said one size fits all, we wouldn't know what size that is. And that's why that Great Commission and Great Commandment are both mission statements instead of vision scripts.
Thank you for that. Okay, here we got a question from Periscope. How do you decide how much information to download to followers as you are equipping your team?
Well, basically, I think the question that a preacher's kid is asking, I love that. I love that one. The question is, how much information do we give in the context of a vision? Well, you give as much information as they can assimilate, and then a little bit more. Every church is different, but you don't overwhelm with content right at first. You begin to lead and paint the big picture, and then you begin to fill in the gaps. Many pastors will indeed do that. They will just give all this information, and the church members won't know, okay, what is this pastor saying? What direction is this pastor pointing? Instead, it is best to start with this big picture and then begin to fill in the gaps.
Super. Okay, kind of a basic question, but what happens when a church doesn't have a vision?
Well, when a church does not have a vision, the church does not know where it's going. And when a church does not know where it's going, it cannot fulfill its mission. Very basic. You say you have the Great Commission. Let's just use that as our mission statement. Okay, we all believe in the Great Commission, and we could use the one from Matthew 28 or one of the other Gospels, and we could say, we all know that we're supposed to go and make disciples of all nations. Okay, how are we going to do that? And so you start asking the question, how are we going to do that? And at that point, what you're doing, whether you know it or not, is you're beginning to form a vision. It may be a little haphazard. It may be more incidental than strategic, but you're thinking vision. So the first thing that you ask is, how are we going to fulfill the Great Commission? If I am in an underground church in China and in a home meeting privately for fear of the authorities, I'm going to answer that question a lot differently than if I'm where you and I are, Franklin, Tennessee, and we have the freedom to worship, but we have a totally different demographic. So answering that question begins the formation of the vision.
That's really, really good. So I think some pastors certainly find this to be challenging. Have you ever encountered pastors who have developed their vision and then they've shared it and then it's poorly received or they get blowback from the congregation? And if so, why does that happen?
There could be a number of reasons, but it's again basic change leadership. One is inability or failure to get buy-in from your key leaders. A leader should not go into any type of meeting until the key leaders have already bought in.
Yes.
You don't want to surprise the leaders where they're saying, I don't understand this, I don't want to understand that. So I advocate to church leaders to get that guiding coalition, build that guiding coalition so that when you are together and you start presenting this, those who are the influencers in the church have already said, yeah, we're behind this. And not only are they offering tacit support, they're offering explanations as well about why this is good. And so if you're not getting buy-in, maybe the reason is you have not spent the time one-on-one with some of these key leaders or maybe some small groups to understand that they need to hear first, not because they're more important, but because they will have the influence to move the vision forward. And another reason is you may not have anticipated some of the obstacles that will occur. And, you always ask the question, what are some possible downsides? I'll always love the upside question, mm-hmm. But what are some things that we haven't talked about that may come out in the context of this? Those two things alone can derail the process of moving forward.
That's really good. So one of the things I talk about in the book, in The Vision Driven Leader, is this idea, Thom, that you really articulated, which I call cascading communication, but that you have to cascade the information. It starts with you as the leader. This is, coming up with the vision is not something you can delegate or outsource or have written for you. You've got to get alone. You've got to go away and you've got to get on paper, what it is that you see and what it is that you want, but then to come back. And I suggest people get it about 70% of the way there, then come back to their leadership team, however they define that, but the inner circle, and then share that with them and say, look, I've been thinking about the future. I probably don't have it quite right. This needs to be tweaked and I need your input so that it can be our vision, not just my vision. And then once you have that, to cascade it down to the next level of leadership, so that, to me, when you're in that full congregational meeting or when you're before whoever it is, your constituents, that you don't want anybody in leadership surprised. Nobody there in leadership hearing it for the first time.
Exactly. The point that you made right at the beginning is worth pursuing just a little bit more. You said go and get alone. Pastors will say, what is the beginning point of a good vision statement? I would say get along with God for a while. Yeah. Just go into a time of prayer, go into a time of intensive scriptural study. Use that time as you best can discern it to hear from him. And as you begin to take these notes down, and whether you come up with something that is 70% in structure or maybe even a little bit less, be willing to take that with a bit of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. I actually love pushback. I love it when my team, I don't think my team will literally say, Thom, you're stupid. But I do think that some of the comments would at least imply that some of the ideas are not the smartest thing in the world. And I know my team does two things. One, they have a vision as well, and they help shape the overall vision. They're visionaries. So part of my leadership team will help shape the vision. And another thing is they're protective of me and the organization, like many of your leaders are protective of the pastor and the church. And they want us to do the right thing. So as they begin to shape the vision, they're thinking not only what is best for the congregation, but how can our pastor, pointing to that person, might be you in the room, how can our pastor be the best messenger for this? And how can we make sure that we are looking after our pastor during this time?
Boy, I tell you, a lot of churches have division. They have a lot of controversy. And I think it really goes back to this idea of vision. When you go through the process like you've described, Thom, I think it has an enormous opportunity to create alignment. And it's not something that just happens. It's not something that I think as a pastor you can demand it. You just say, hey, it's my way or the highway, line up or find another church. No, I think you create that through a process of discussion, through engagement, through wrestling through the best ideas. And I think, frankly, as a leader, with having the humility to create an environment that's safe for dissent, where people can push back and collectively form something and make it better than any one person could come up with.
The issue of dissent, negativity in churches is well worth noting. Um, Perhaps many won't remember this tradition in churches. Some will. I come from a Baptistic tradition, and for many years we had the owl walking tradition, where when you would make a commitment of some type to become a follower of Christ, to join the church, you would walk an aisle. It goes back to the Billy Sunday days of the Sawdust Trail. Could give a whole history of that. You don't see that much anymore these days. It was a methodological moment in history. But I remember during those days, a mentor pastor told me, he said, Thom, as long as you got people walking the aisles, you're going to have a lot less fights. You're going to have a lot less arguments. And the point was, if the church is perceived to be moving forward, more people have less time to talk about the negative.
Yes.
More people are focusing on the positive. And if you're in a church that has disunity, there may be a number of reasons behind it, but perhaps part of the diagnosis is, let's get the church moving beyond herself. Let's get the church looking forward. Let's get the church looking at the vision that God has. And when people get excited about that, they get less concerned about the color of the walls, the length of the service, or the style of music, and it moves them forward.
So true. Okay, guys, you can get a free copy of The Vision Driven Church Leader at visiondrivenleader.com/church. And if you want to just find out about the book, and by the way, almost $200 worth of free bonuses when you buy the book from any retailer. You can go just to visiondrivenleader.com. So again, visiondrivenleader.com/church. You see it on the screen in front of you. Let me get another question here, because Carrie's asking a good question. Carrie's a friend of mine. She says, once a church has a mission statement, vision, and has worked through how to implement, then what? It is easy to lose sight of mission, vision, and action plan when in the midst of doing ministry after having put much prayer and effect into beginning the process.
Carrie's got a very insightful question. Compliment you on that, Carrie. The reality is you can never communicate enough. So one of the things that is true in vision is over communicate. When you are sick of hearing the vision, you probably are just beginning to make progress with the church. So don't think that at any point that you have over communicated. If anything, most leaders under communicate. Here's another thing. Leaders need, particularly leaders in churches, need to establish personal priorities. And what happens is we often get in the busyness of church and we forget the main thing. We replace the great with good. Mm-hmm. And if we really want to be a part of the Great Commission and the Great Commandment, that mission statement, that means we have to stay on task with the vision as well. And it is so easy in a church. I've been in different types of organizations, and I think it's probably the greatest danger in a church for a pastor or other church leader to get off vision, because there's so many things, pastoral care, funerals, weddings, meetings to go to. You have to force yourself to stay on task. You have to force yourself to over communicate.
Absolutely. So true. Okay, there's another question here that I want to take from Josh. He says, vision scripts not only include what an organization will focus on, but implicitly what it won't. This inevitably will disappoint some church members whose ministry or service hopes aren't included in the vision. How can we help those people join the vision?
Well, Josh, with those people, you first of all remember they're still the sheep, and so they still need to be shepherded. The first is kind of a negative. You don't exclude them because they have not bought in. You continue to love them. You continue to shepherd them. That is just part of the vision. And here is what I have found with those who are late adopters, or maybe you think there will be never adopters. If you continue to demonstrate love to them, Christ's love to them, eventually the late adopters will begin to come alongside the other adopters and alongside you. The issue more is, how are you going to respond to these who won't come along? Not that you don't move forward, but how do you respond to those? It will take time, and there will always be a few who will never buy in. In fact, some of them have been in my churches before. I know them well. You can't stop the vision for the few. You've got to move forward, but be pastoral as possible.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think that we have to remember as leaders, whether it's in the church or in business or some other organization, that not everybody likes change as much as we do. You know, I think the one thing that most leaders I know have in common is they kind of thrive on change, but it's very unsettling for people. And one of the things I've always encouraged people to do is when you begin to cast a new vision, to remind people what's not going to change. Because if people have some way to get a footing on something that's stable, that's not going to change, maybe it's your mission, maybe it's some of the traditions that you have in your church that are not going to change, it's much easier for them to relax and to process the change because everybody's listening to it through the lens of, what does this mean for me? And if you can anticipate that and answer that question, it helps. Have you found that to be true, Thom?
I have. Let me bring in two other Rainer sons. I'm not going to bring them into the Facebook. We've talked about art, so I'll bring in the other two. My pastor in Nashville is Jess Rainer, my youngest son, at the church at Spring Hill. He started a church, so basically people came to the vision. Everybody that came in. However, my oldest son is Thom Rainer, and when I'm in Florida, he's my pastor at West Bradenton in the Bradenton, Florida area. He is in a church that is multi-generational and in a church that has a long history. He did something that I thought was just very, very insightful for a pastor. His first year there, he did not do this exclusively, but he went to the longer term members, some of them older adults, not all of them, but some of them. And he asked this question: can you remember some of the greatest times in this church? Tell me about them. And he was able to grab those times and say, do you remember the change you had to go through? Do you remember how it shifted your church, but on the other side, it looked better? And he may not have said it explicitly like that, but he used those points of great memories as launching pads for the future. And that is something that you can do in a church because you have the opportunity to connect with those people who have a long history. And if you sit down and talk with them, they'll tell you that history, and you can use that for the future.
That is so, so good. I love the different examples there. Okay, this is a great quote that I want you to see, Thom, from John Adams. We strive for vision-driven budget instead of budget-driven vision. You want to comment on that?
Okay. John, you have a good, healthy historical name, but I just want to put you in the annals of my church history. That is absolutely brilliant what you're doing there. Most churches start with a budget that is just a tweak from the previous year, that goes back to previous years, and we never ask not only what are we doing vision-wise, but how should we resource it? Yeah. And if you start asking the question, how does our budget align with our vision? You're going to make some different decisions than the way you do budgets normally. And you know what? Your vision may shape your budget where you will actually find greater efficiencies, and you can do more with less or more with the same.
Yes.
And so that's what a vision will do for you. Love that, John. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a really good insight. Okay, I want to just kind of go rapid fire through the chapters in The Vision-Driven Church Leader. And again, this isn't a big book. It's a guide to my book, The Vision-Driven Leader. But again, it's written by Art Rainer, who's Thom's son. But one of the things that the first chapter talks about is it's never too late to zag. And that corresponds with the chapter that I have in the book. But let me ask you this question. Is it ever too late? Where a church is just on life support, it's almost kind of a zombie church. Is it too late for them to recast vision?
Okay, it is rare that it's too late for a church to recast vision. There are some churches that are down to 2 people, 3 people, and they have given up. Mm-hmm. So there are the outliers, that they're the exception. But here's what I believe. The God of the resurrection, who has the power to help us live eternally, has the same power to keep churches' doors open and then thriving.
Amen. Love
and
that.
What does that mean? That means get the vision, get the plan, move forward with it. And Michael, the first church I ever pastored had 7 members in it. It was in southern Indiana.
Wow.
And there was a congregational vote to call me because we were congregational government. And the vote was 6-1. I mean, 7 people, and I could not get a unanimous vote. I mean, that just tells you how lousy I was. In fact, I asked Mary Mulliken, the lone dissenter, why she voted against me. She said, "You're the lousiest preacher I've ever heard." So that was my welcome. That was my welcome to a church. That church was started, if I remember my numbers correctly, 1792.
Wow.
And the building was built pre-Civil War, and everybody had said it was dead. Now, it's not because Thom Rainer came in as a hero, but it is because they caught a vision for that rural community. And 1 year later, the church was averaging 70. Everyone had declared that church dead.
10 times increase.
Yes. 10 times in, that actually sounds good. But to be fair, I then had a family of 4, so that accounted for a good bit of the increase. In fact, I bragged to my friends that I'm up 60%. How's your church doing the first day that we were there? But no, I think God, I know God has the power for any church to thrive.
Well, I just thought of Proverbs 29. I can't remember the verse number, but without vision, the people perish. But to kind of invert that, turn it on its head, with vision, people flourish.
Exactly.
There's an invigorating part to vision that it has on the life of any organization, but especially churches.
And again, you didn't ask me to do this, Michael. That's why I wish church leaders would get this free download, Art's book and your book, and say, I'm going to take these two and I'm going to learn how to make a difference. Because when they do that, not only will they see their church members begin to turn toward the positive, they will as well.
Yes.
Many pastors struggle. And maybe one of the reasons, among others, that pastors struggle is they don't spend enough time in the vision part because they get down in some of the other parts. And I wish they'd just take these books side by side.
I do too, because I want to get pastors out of being reactive. And I know there's a certain amount of that's inevitable given the responsibilities of being a pastor, but to get out of that reactive mode and to get proactive and start leading people towards a different future, a bigger, better future by God's grace. Chapter 2 talks about the vision grid for church leaders. And this is all about creating a vision that's clear. And one of the things I've noticed in the Gospels, I can't remember if we talked about this on the interview that you did with me on your podcast or not, but 3 times in the Gospels, Jesus comes to people and he says, what do you want me to do? What do you want? And I think that sometimes we feel like, well, that's selfish. It's not about what I want. It's what God wants. Well, why did God ask those people what they want him to do? And I think it's important to get that clarity around the what of what we're pursuing. But how is that unique in a church context, getting clear on the what?
Well, the what is unique because the what leads to eternal implications. If there's ever an organization that needs clarity about its vision, it is the church. Mm-hmm. Because local churches, what we do are and to put it in the vernacular, we are in the business of sharing good news that has eternal implications for people and life-changing implications in this life right now. I cannot think of anything that would be more exciting than to be called as a pastor of a church or a church leader. And at the same time, I can't think of anything that would be more challenging as well. Mm-hmm. And it's that unique combination that reminds us that if we are clear about what we are supposed to do, that in itself will put a fire under many of your members as well as you, the leader of the church.
That's so good. In the chapter 3, I talk about developing the vision script, and that's the term that I use. And I knew this was going to need some translation, and this is why I was so eager to get somebody, and thankfully it was Art at your recommendation, to translate this. Because in the Vision-Driven Leader, I say that your vision script should consist of 4 sections. So you should talk about your team, first of all, then your product, and then sales and marketing and impact. And then Art came back in this book, The Vision-Driven Church Leader, and he said, you need at least those 4 different sections, but you need a little translation. So team is team. You're going to have paid staff members. Right. You're going to have volunteer staff members, a little bit more complicated in the church. You're going to discover, in terms of product, discover what needs your church is best equipped to fill for your community. And in terms of sales and marketing, how can you best reach the community that you're called to serve? And then impact, how do you determine in a church? And I want to camp on this for just a minute. What are some of the ways that a church can determine whether or not it's having an impact in terms of its vision and its impact on the communities it's serving?
I am still fairly strong on metrics. Metrics are not everything because some things do not lend themselves to numerical measure. When you begin to ask the question, how deep is that person's walk with Christ? You can see some of the evidence of the fruit of the Spirit, but it's hard to put a numerical measurement to it. But in a church, hear this well, whatever you measure gets rewarded, and what gets rewarded becomes your de facto vision. So if you are demonstrating worship attendance, what you're saying is the gathered church is important. That's great. If you are demonstrating or showing financials, what you're saying is stewardship is important. That is great. But how about others? How about how many people are we reaching with the gospel message of Christ? How many of our people are actually doing ministry as opposed to sitting on the sidelines? Those are
Hmm.
metrics that you can come by pretty quickly. And I think if your vision, especially in a church, is going strongly, you're going to see all of those become more positive, more people involved in ministry, greater attendance, greater stewardship or giving, and greater impact upon the community. Another thing I do is I think the budget, yeah, the budget is obviously started by someone that has a vision for the future. Usually that is the case, but the budget is also a measure of what we are doing. So the
Hmm.
budget becomes a metric in itself.
Yeah, that's really good. Good. Okay, so the chapter 4 talks about communicating your church's vision. Now, as a pastor, how do you think about that communication? Because I think a lot of organizations, at least in the secular world where I work, they'll get a vision done, they'll get a strategic plan done, it goes on the shelf, gathers dust, they don't look at it again. So it's not really an operationally important document. So if you don't want that to happen in the church, how as the pastor do you keep it alive?
Well, let me give a very positive for pastors and other church leaders. You have an opportunity that hardly any other organizational leader has. You get all of your people in person in front of you every single week, post corona, of course, pre coronavirus, but you have the opportunity to speak into them every single week. Certainly, there are other communication methodologies. There's your website, there's newsletters, there's informal conversations. But think about that. Hardly any organization gets its people in front of them physically, visibly on an ongoing basis. That does not mean that you stand up and read a vision script. But what that does mean is in the context of your sermon, in the context of maybe some announcements that you want to make, you will always have the opportunity to reinforce some aspect of that vision during that time. And although there are probably a dozen ways that it can be communicated, don't forget the power of the gathered group, the
Hmm.
in-person service, to use this time to communicate the vision.
Tom, what do you think about frequency? You know, what seems about the right frequency from your perspective?
In terms of the entire vision script or in terms of portions of it, because if we're talking in terms of portions of it, it is a lot more frequent than you think it is, Pastor.
Hmm.
So you're rarely communicating enough. I do work with some pastors, Michael, that have a vision renewal annually where they remind the people of the big picture.
I
And,
love
and
that.
so they have, sometimes it's at the first of the year, sometimes it's at other points that make sense to the local congregation. So they have the big reminder. But in terms of the components that you're constantly emphasizing, it's constant and it's never enough.
Fantastic. By the way, if you guys have got questions, I don't care if you're on YouTube or Periscope or Facebook, I'm seeing all the comments that are coming in. So please go ahead and post it. Just preface it with a Q, and then I'll know that that's a question. But for example, this isn't a question. But Johnny said, I'm a pastor and I also teach positive psychology at Johns Hopkins University. Awesome. Great combination. Personally, I love positive psychology. Tony, good to see you. I see you there on Facebook. Fantastic. Okay, so the vision driven church leader. You can pick up your copy right there. Um, Johnny did have a question though, and I'm going to go back here and grab it. And here's what he said. How can I share my faith friendly content with Tom's team to protect the leaders from soul abuse? No, I don't know. If people wanted to get in contact with you based on this, maybe they actually want to use you guys to help shape their vision script. I don't know if you have any resources like that where you do coaching and consulting,
We
but
do.
how can people connect with you after this?
Simply info@churchanswers.com.
Info at churchanswers.com. Okay,
Our team would love to hear from anyone.
great. Tom, before we close this out, because we're just about out of time and I don't see any more questions, do you have any final words that you want to speak to our folks here on Vision?
Right now, we are in the obvious situation of a pandemic, and we are getting ready to start the process of moving back to in-person services. Every state, every locality will have a different timetable. But here is my admonition to church leaders. Now is the time, if you have not done so, to begin to do things in anticipation of your future, not just the immediate future, which is the post-pandemic weeks, but also a longer term future. And if there is one thing that would come out of our time together with Michael and me, it is begin rethinking, reshaping, or maybe for the first time, how you're going to lead the church forward with your vision. So all of this has been about this whole thing about vision, but don't leave this Facebook Live or wherever your platform is, don't leave this time without being ready to do something about it. Take action. And the first action is obviously getting the books. It's a free book, and the interpretation, and then the Vision Driven Leader book as well. So that is something that, of all the things you can be doing right now, that would be one of the higher priorities. Get ready to have clarity for your vision.
I'll tell you, it's so important. My experience right now dealing with business owners and just people in general in our community, people are starved for vision. You know, they're facing the challenges of living in this environment every single day. That's very present to them, but they need a hope that transcends this present moment. And this is not going to last forever. And I think the people that hit the ground running with clarity around a vision is going to be huge.
You got it.
Well, Thom, thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, check out his website at churchanswers.com and at Thom Rainer, Thom with a H, Thom, ThomRainer.com. And check out thevisiondrivenleader.com/church, where you can get a free copy. Did I mention it's free? A free copy of the Vision Driven Church Leader. It'll be a great guide for you as you develop a vision for your church. Again, Thom, thanks. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you for working with Art Rainer on this project.
Yeah, loved it. See you guys.